the OldPreMeds podcast, session number 201. You're a non-traditional student entering the medical field on your terms. You may have had some hiccups along the way, but now you're ready to change course and go back and serve others as a physician. This podcast is here to help answer your questions and help educate you on your non-traditional journey to becoming a physician. And welcome to the OldPreMeds podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week, where I take questions directly from the OldPreMeds forum, the non-traditional pre-med forum, over at premedforums.com. If you have a question you want answered, go over to premedforums.com, register for an account if you don't already have one, and hopefully we'll get to it here on the podcast. We're always looking for more great questions, so head on over there now. Again, premedforums.com. Today we have a good question about checking the volunteer box. I love the checkbox questions. Our student today says, any and all opinions are welcome on this one. With the MCAT and application cycle drawing near, I'm debating shifting my volunteer efforts on opportunities away from medicine and instead towards low income and or marginalized populations in my area, such as at a food pantry, public health education foundation, or cultural office in my city. My reasoning, I've struggled to find open volunteer positions at the free clinics in my area, and I'm currently volunteering in an emergency department at a metropolitan hospital. Despite the visual learning I've gained here, I feel somewhat redundant and believe my time could be better applied elsewhere. I love serving low-income and marginalized populations. I've volunteered for a free clinic in the past, albeit for less than 6 months, and I am confident that public health service will be my focus coming out of medical school. And number 3, I come from a family full of healthcare professionals with whom I discuss the ins and outs of the healthcare field frequently, and so I feel I clearly understand what I'm getting myself into. I don't want to volunteer just to, quote, check the box. I'd like to impact the people I know I'll one day be serving through medicine. However, my concern is that admissions committees will see the choice of discontinued volunteer work in medicine in favor of general volunteer work at a loss of interest in the field, or as a loss of interest in the field altogether, which is, of course, not true. Assuming my application shows solid letters of recs from docs and professors, good GPA MCAT scores, and a commitment to serving people, no matter the arena, should I even be worried? Thank you in advance. All right, so this is a great question that comes up all of the time. Do I need to continue doing clinical experience, getting clinical experience, being in a clinical area, if I know this is what I want? And I've had people argue with me about it when I give them my opinion. And so I will give you my opinion and I'll let you argue with me later. The heart of this question is really an either-or question when it doesn't have to be. Why can't it be both? Why does this student think they have to, let's just say 20 hours, why does this student think they have to shift all 20 of their hours from clinical experience a week to 20 hours doing soup kitchen work, food pantry work for the week? This is not an either-or game. You can do both. And I recommend you do both because that is how you maintain your sanity through this process. You don't go all in with the clinical experience and shadowing because that's what you think you have to do, and research and whatever else you think you have to do. You need to continue doing the things you want to do that bring you joy, that spark that fire, that drive inside of you. For some of you, you'll nerd out and go, well, Dr. Gray, clinical experience is what sparks that joy. And that's great. I would still recommend maybe going and finding some other experiences as well, like a food pantry or getting involved in public health education and some of these other things. Those are awesome experiences. Being well-rounded and doing what you want to do is ultimately the core of what makes a good application, not just amazing stats and thousands of hours of clinical experience, shadowing, and research. That's checking the box. Going off and volunteering at the food pantry is great, but I wouldn't dedicate all of your time to it. because, as the student said, is there a question of loss of interest? I like and talking to admissions committee members and hearing them talk at conferences that I go to. Consistency is important. Showing that you have continued interest in these activities is important. Not just talking to your family members because they're in healthcare. That is definitely not what you want to do. During an interview, if you get asked, "Hey, Johnny, Sally, I see that you stopped volunteering at the hospital. Why did you do that?" "Oh, well, I talked to my mom and dad about what it's like for them to be doctors, so I know what it's all about." This whole process is an exploration of you, not of them. You need to go through this process. You need to experience this stuff firsthand. You need to hear what happens in a clinical setting. You need to smell what happens in a clinical setting. You need to feel what happens in a clinical setting. And it's not until then that you've proven to yourself that this is what you want to do. And it's not until you've proven it to yourself that you will be able to prove it to an admissions committee member. So yeah, don't check boxes, but continue to get these experiences and do these other things that you're interested in. Consistency isn't 20 hours a week. Consistency can be, or rather, consistency doesn't have to be 20 hours a week. Consistency can be 5 hours a month, 10 hours a month. And that will free up time for you to do these other things that will give you joy. So as you go through this process, stop going through it, trying to think about what will work best for your application and what the admissions committees want to see. And go through this process thinking about what you want to do, knowing in the back of your head that yes, you will need some consistent experiences around shadowing and clinical experience because that is what you're trying to prove you want to go into. And having shadowing and clinical experience from 3 years ago, even if it's a good chunk of change hours-wise, isn't good enough to prove that you still want to do this. I hope that was helpful for you. A little passionate discussion about extracurriculars and clinical experience and volunteering and all of that. It's something that I really, really, really drive home and want to drive home because so many students struggle with this decision of what to do and when to do it and how to do it and what looks good and what doesn't look good. So go through this process. Listen to this episode. Take its advice. I encourage you. And then you'll be better as an applicant. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, if you have questions you want answered here on the podcast, go to premedforums.com, find the non-traditional pre-med forums, register for an account if you don't already have one, and don't forget to check out our other podcasts. We have the MCAT podcast, we have the MCAT Cars podcast, we have the Pre-Med Years podcast, we have specialty stories and more, as well as our YouTube channel at premed.tv. Go check them all out, and I will see you next week here on the Old Pre-Meds podcast.
This is MedEd Media.